Good evening, kids. I hope you're doing well this evening. I hope you've had a good day, whatever you've been up to. It's not been the best day for weather, has it? But anyway, what can we do? We are continuing our wonderful series of My Little Miss World by Roger Hargreaves. And tonight we have someone called Little Miss Contrary. So, is Little Miss Contrary? What does it mean to be contrary? And does she change her ways or does she stick to her ways? Let's find out. Little Miss Contrary always did the opposite of what you would think she would do. For instance, if you asked her to switch on the television, she would switch on the light. For example, if you asked her the time, she would tell you the date, and she always said the opposite of what she really meant. Oh dear, she sounds confusing already. If something's contrary to something, it means the opposite as much as possible. Mind you, it wasn't exactly her fault. It was probably because she lived in a place called Muddle Land, where everything is so mixed up and muddled, you don't know whether you are coming or going or coming, as they say in Muddle Land. It's a very strange place indeed. The worms don't live in holes in Muddle Land. They live in trees. And the birds live in holes. And if you want a loaf of bread, you don't go to the baker's. You go to the butcher's. The baker sells bananas. How strange. One morning, Little Miss Contrary was having breakfast, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, and there was a knock at the door. Little Miss Contrary didn't hear it at first because it was more of a tap than a knock. Tap, tap, tap. But she did hear it eventually and went to see who it was. I wonder which Mr. Man Little Miss it'll be. She opened the door. Hello, said a little voice. Little Miss Contrary looked down and down again, and there stood Mr. Small. He raised his hat. Hello, he said again. Goodbye, smiled Little Miss Contrary. Mr. Small looked puzzled. As well he might. I wonder if you can help me, he asked. Little Miss Contrary smiled. Of course I can't, she said. Oh dear, said Mr. Small. You see, I'm lost. Well, she said, nice to meet you, Mr. Lost. No, said Mr. Small. I'm trying to find somebody called Little Miss Contrary. That's you, laughed Little Miss Contrary. I have a letter for her, said Mr. Small. Oh, bad, she said. I don't get any telephone calls. She sounds very similar to Mr. Muddle, doesn't she? Hello, said Little Miss Contrary, and shut the door. Mr. Small went home shaking his head. The letter was from Mr. Happy, of course, inviting Little Miss Contrary to his birthday party. Mr. Happy had never met Little Miss Contrary, but he had heard about her and thought it would be nice to have her to his party. The invitation was for 3 o'clock on Tuesday, March the 14th. At 2 o'clock on Monday, March the 13th, Little Miss Contrary knocked on Mr. Happy's door. Happy Christmas! Who are you? He asked. I am Little Miss Sunshine, replied Little Miss Contrary. No, you're not, said Mr. Happy. I know Little Miss Sunshine, and she's not a bit like you. It's a good job they know who she is, because she doesn't seem to know who she is. Always getting muddled, bless her. He stopped and thought. Oh, he smiled. I know who you really are. You're Little Miss Contrary, aren't you? I've heard that you always say and do the opposite of what you mean. Poor girl's got a bad reputation. You'd better come in, said Mr. Happy. No, thank you, smiled Little Miss Contrary. Mr. Happy led her into his living room. What a horrible room, she said. Mr. Happy grinned. He was beginning to realize that everything he had heard about Little Miss Contrary was true. Would you like a cup of tea? He asked. I can't think of anything I'd like less, said Little Miss Contrary. Mr. Happy grinned again and went to put the kettle on. Oh, he's starting to get her and be nice to her, isn't he? That's good. After his tea, Mr. Happy took little Miss Contrary to meet some of his friends. He had to explain to them all that what she was saying was the exact opposite of what she really meant. "Aren't you thin?" she said to Mr. Greedy. I bet I like that comment. "You know, you have very short arms," she said to Mr. Tickle. "I like your beard," she said to Mr. Fussy. It's a moustache. "Well," she said eventually, "thank you for the most perfect afternoon. Now I must go home before it gets light." "Perfect?" asked Mr. Happy. "Perfectly dreadful," she agreed, and off she went. "I say," chuckled Mr. Greedy to Mr. Happy, "you do know some funny people." "You can say that again," laughed Mr. Happy. "You do know some funny people," said Mr. Greedy. Mr. Happy grinned and went home. At home, Mr. Happy remembered the parcel that little Miss Contrary had given him. "It must be a birthday present," he said, and he hurried to where he had left the parcel and unwrapped it. Inside was indeed a present and a card. He opened the birthday card first. Inside it said, "Many miserable returns of the day." And would you like to know what the present was? A pair of socks. I've never seen any Mr. Men wearing socks. That'll be a new one. Well, not quite a pair of socks. One sock was white and the other sock was black, and as little Miss Contrary would say, that is the beginning of the story. Oh, they're in the end. What a funny book that. Little Miss Contrary, what a little character she. An enjoyable story nonetheless. I hope you're going to join me tomorrow for the next of Mr. Parker's bedtime stories. It's someone who just loves gymnastics and just can't keep standing still. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it too. So join me tomorrow and we'll have the next Mr. Parker's bedtime stories. Have a great evening and a good day tomorrow. See you tomorrow, guys.